I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which I record this podcast, the land of the Kabi Kabi peoples. I pay my respects to the traditional owners of country and their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community podcast, I have a great conversation with Professor Pascal Perez. Pascal is the Director of the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, or AURIN for short, a national research infrastructure facility funded by the Australian government that serves researchers across the country working on urban systems, infrastructure, and local communities. In this episode, Pascal tells us about using story mapping tools to communicate research outcomes, mixing plain text, interactive maps, and traditional graphs. We discuss the Australian Urban Health Indicators Project, examining heat waves, including the challenge of creating better causation indicators and including mobile location data. We finish our chat discussing the critical difference between data, information, and knowledge, and why the hard yards are really between information and knowledge. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Pascal. How are you today?
I'm very good, Zoe. Very nice to meet you again.
I know. We were just discussing last time I was in Barcelona. Now we're in our own home offices or in our offices.
Hey.
Still exotic, I guess. But anyway, let's jump into this. Can you please introduce yourself, tell us about your background, and a little bit about your current work?
Professor Pascal Perez, Director of the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, that's a mouthful, in short, AURIN. We are a national research infrastructure facility funded by the Australian government, and we have a mandate to serve all the researchers around the country working on urban systems, infrastructure systems, local communities, providing them with data, with digital infrastructure support, and upskilling whenever needed. As you can hear, I'm French still, and I've been in Australia for 24 years now. And I started as an engineer, yes, but in agriculture. And that's where the story is interesting in terms of storytelling, because I think environmental studies I've had for a long time, at least they were 2 steps ahead, if not 3, of what was happening in urban research in terms of engagement and participation. And then arriving in Australia, I started to broaden my horizons, going into social behavior and then cities and infrastructure.
Yeah, amazing. I don't know if I knew about you being an engineer, unless I've forgotten. But yeah, amazing. And
I'm coming with my scenes. Sorry, Zoe.
I'm an engineer also. So yes, I also come with my sins. Civil. I'm a civil engineer, civil and environmental engineer. But anyway, this isn't about me. So much in that. Let's just start with a really broad question about how you or your organization uses data visualizations or storytelling.
Yeah. So we'll start with the end of the story, which is what we're doing now is visualization. And as I mentioned, AURIN, we're not delivering research, we're supporting research groups around the country. So we're providing data, curating data, helping with the analytics or even the modeling, which means we'll be at arm's length of the outcome of the research. And if we talk about cities and infrastructure, the influence on policies and interventions, for example. So the way we use it is really about trying to communicate something about a given application that's really dry. When you think about data, you've got graphs, it's a bit boring, and not everybody understands them, or the colors are not the right one. So what we've been playing with recently, and mainly last year, is the story mapping tools. we're trying to mix plain text, maps, and interactive maps with the sliders and all the bells and whistles we can use nowadays online, but also traditional graphs, as I mentioned before. We've used it for a project called the Australian Urban Health Indicators last year, based on a collaboration with researchers at QUT in Queensland and University of Western Australia. And we even won an international prize in terms of putting together a story map about the project. So we were quite chuffed about that. And we're developing a couple of other story maps. So I think any project we're going to support will go through a story mapping now. Another example, and so this is really about awareness and engagement, knowing that in this case, we don't really know who we engage with because this is web-based. Something which is a bit closer to direct engagement is another project we contributed to last year called Map of the Month. And this was coordinated and led by our colleagues at Uni Melbourne, where we are located, from the Centre for Cities, with my colleague Michele Acuto at the time, but we moved on since. And Map of the Month is an idea that started in South Africa, of all places, where local researchers, journalists, and communities started thinking about how to have evidence-based decisions that could be shared with everyone, and the communities contributing to the narrative. And so the story was about just getting a theme, getting people in a room, say, what kind of information do you need about this theme to understand better what's going on? And the researchers were going into their den and coming back after months. So that was the map of the month, and publishing the map in the newspaper in this case, which was pretty two-dimensional, even fixed map. But very, very good engagement process, as I understand. So what we did at the time last year for 6 months, working with City of Melbourne and local communities, is to do exactly the same. So we had six maps being produced over a 6 months period as a pilot on different topics. There was nighttime economy, where are the people living, where do they work? City of Dogs, which is a fantastic success online. Everybody rushed onto the map of City of Dogs, and so on and so forth. So again, awareness and engagement, that's where we are for the moment.
Yeah, the one I was just looking at was the one around social connection and bumping spaces. So it's got libraries, neighborhood houses, and community centers, and just showing that on the map. So I guess then, I mean, you can use that as a community member to see where things are, but then you can also see where maybe there's gaps, or maybe there's quite a lot of, I don't know, things available in that space, or what other things could be there to complement those and things like that.
Absolutely.
And I imagine with the nighttime economy, you could do something similar where, as a community member, you go, oh, I didn't know that, those things were on, because it just brings it to life in a map, but then also looking at the gaps and, the different services that are offered, or maybe there's an oversaturation potentially in sports.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm going to say. That there's also not who are these people, because the kind of information you can get from is not that precise, but where the people are coming from, what's the regularity, and what are the patterns of these people, and what are the consequences in terms of security for them. Because everybody's talking about, growth centers and nighttime activation, but then there's also people living around and people coming and going. And previous life I was working on drug and alcohol issues using models and visualization. And this was a massive issue for law enforcement and community service groups to make sure that it's fun, but it's safe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the City of Dogs, is that just mapping where all the registered dogs are? I think I have seen this, and I think I've
No,
just...
it's where are the dog parks, where are the vet clinics, anything about the I think the dog grooming shops. So it was a bit of a fun one, this one. But if you want to relocate and you've got your lovely pooch with you, with the map, you might choose to live in this suburb or that suburb of Melbourne.
Interesting. Because I've seen another map, and maybe it must be a different one, where it's like all of the registered pets or something, which I think I've seen that on City of Melbourne's 3D model.
Okay.
Perhaps. Anyway, maybe I'm thinking of a different layer, but yeah, that would be another interesting one where, and I guess as a dog owner, you would then be able to use that, but then councils could use it, decision makers, but also if you're a business owner, maybe you might choose a gap in the market, or again, just a complementary service to what's already available, or whatever the case is. Yeah.
You know, I don't know about yourself, but I've got 2 dogs, and I still live in New South Wales, but in regional New South Wales, and it's not a bit like the GPs. It's not easy to know whether you can have a vet around, and more importantly, whether the vet will have a 24/7, at least, you know, once or twice a week, service available, or, and if not, where would you have to go for an emergency?
Yes, I also have a dog these days, and yes, that was definitely on my list of things. Where do I go if there's an emergency? And yeah, the 24-hour, what services they have, all of that kind of stuff. And I think the more people live in cities and have, you know, kind of smaller backyards and things like that, they want to know the other infrastructure around for pets and things like that. Yeah, cool. Okay. So I know you've got a lot more examples, and I do want to go through those as well, but let's just come back a little bit, and I want to come back to the first project you talked about, the story mapping. Can you give us a little bit? I know you were the data kind of wranglers, or provided the tools, but what type of problem were they trying to solve? What were they using that data for?
The project itself, and it was a nice synergy between the data geeks, so us, and the researchers who are really trying to solve problems. And if you think about, and what I mentioned, you know, it was about health indicators in cities. So HI, the HI could become also heat island effect. And actually most of the project focused on heat island effects and heat waves in cities. And the starting point, the question we wanted to answer is, can we move from a pure correlation? If you think about how we report about the impact of the heat wave in cities for environment, it's most of the time a statistical area level 2, the best case scenario, and you've got the number of casualties, and someone has defined somehow a heat wave in some part of Sydney or Melbourne or wherever, and it's a pure correlation, number of casualties and temperature compared with something else as a heat wave. When you said this, you said everything, and you said nothing, because there's no idea whether these people were really suffering from a heat stroke or anything, or whether they were even there. So what we try to do with the project is try to become more granular. So try to get higher resolution data sets, and to prove we could do it, and I'll explain why it was already a big gamble. And then where can we improve the outcome in terms of knowledge? So the kind of data we needed for that is to go down to statistical area level 1, so much more precise. It's not still street block or even individual houses, and not yet, but SA1 was already a good challenge. And we brought data from the Bureau of Statistics at SA1 level, so all the socio-demographics of all the people living in this SA1 area.
And SA1 would be a couple of, just remind us how many?
A couple of hundreds households, roughly.
Yeah, a couple hundred households, yep.
Yeah.
Sorry,
then we got from our colleagues from Geoscape all the buildings we needed, individual buildings. So it was interesting to have SA1 information, socio-demographics, but for the buildings, we had something far more granular. But we also had to take information about the casualties, and that's where it took us a very long time dealing with New South Wales Health, who are very generous, but they've got very strict rules of engagement for very sensitive data, as we understand. So we requested unit health records, linked records, anonymized, of course, for a series of conditions that could be associated with a heat wave. So heat stroke and other things, and having the mainly relying on admission to emergency at the core hospitals. In order to make sure the approach we were trying to develop was broad enough and could be generalized around all Australia, we chose 5 different areas, urban areas, so what was relatively high density of population. So Western Sydney, an obvious one, but also Tweed Heads, Albury, Wollongong, and Newcastle. So very diverse, some close to the ocean, others a bit more inland, and just again to make sure we were robust enough. And finally, the last aspect was to try to get the temperature information we've got from the satellites. So it's a big tile, over a city. How can we bring this information much more precisely at street level, literally? So here it was, and how define a heat wave? What are the criteria? So we took all the good work done by Bureau of Meteorology, CSRO, and we define as precisely as possible a heat wave in space and time. So when you bring all this into a data vault, because we've got individual health records, we don't want anyone to see. You put all this in there, you steer it for a little while, and then our geeks and our researchers looked at the results. And interestingly enough, we didn't have a clearer picture at that level of granularity. So, remember, we were SA2, just correlation. We go down to SA1, we think we've got better causation. Yes, we have, but the signal is not clearer. And one of the two conclusions we drew from that, and still work in progress, but back to storytelling and improving the research and improving outcomes for evidence-based policy, is the fact that even if we know better who lives there, if we know better who was admitted at the hospital, and we know better, we define in a better way the heat wave itself, we have no idea who was there at the right or wrong time, depending on how you take it, during the heat wave, whether they were living there and whether they went to the hospital. So we still have a missing piece in the jigsaw, and back to the narrative and visualization. So now we're working with the telcos, Telstra and Optus, to try to bring this information into the analysis.
Oh, interesting, which adds another layer of privacy complexities as well, I imagine.
And the telco, the information will be aggregated as well. We wouldn't get access to the individual records.
Yeah, wow. So interesting. And so talking about, I guess, the visualization layer, can you talk us through, I guess, how important that was for this project and some of the things that you needed to consider when you were building out the story maps?
And I think it was essential, because when we delivered the outcome of the project within the timeline we had, again, the output was pretty dry. There was a lot of numbers, a lot of tables, and we knew we had to visualize this, at least to report back to the primary data custodians who shared the data generously with us, and of course the departments and authorities who might be interested. And so it was clear that we could not share this kind of data with them as they were, and we had to specialize it, because this was the whole purpose, to have a special inference about what was happening in these different urban areas we had selected. And then we thought, okay, we're going to, because one of the outcomes of the project was to create a synthetic and better indicator about the vulnerability of these places based on who lives there, the urban form for each of the SA1s, and then you bring the literal one in. So visualizing the difference between, this is the temperature in this part of Sydney now, and compare with that part of Sydney, it's a misleading indicator, because it depends on how warm, on average, this part of Sydney is compared with that one. And for example, if you compare Penrith with Manly, people living in Penrith, they're far more used and far less vulnerable on average to warmer temperature compared with people living in Manly. So defining an indicator where we would get rid of that difference to homogenize the risk and the vulnerability was a key aspect of the study that we needed to show the difference. And that's where the story map, when you go online and you look at the story map, I hope we did a good job with that, or my colleagues did a good job with it.
Yeah, well, we'll put the links in the show notes so people can definitely go and have a look. But yeah, I guess it's really interesting to think about this as like a really quite deep data project, obviously about societal issues, public policy, that type of thing. But that the visualization storytelling piece was still so important, even though you were reporting back to custodians of data, which understand data, but to be able to make a decision, they needed that visualization or storytelling component, so then they can actually absorb that as a human being to then be able to make a decision about it.
And for example, in terms of the magnitude, the intensity of a heat wave and its consequence, interestingly enough, when you normalize with this indicator, synthetic indicator we've created, you look at Albury, and Albury can be very, very hot. But again, on average, it's much, much warmer than most of Sydney, for example. And in this case, the maximum values of the indicator in Albury is not as high as some part of Sydney or even some part of Newcastle, because this is where people are not used to it. And even where I live in a small village by the ocean, and when a proper heat wave hitting us, we don't even know what's happening because we're not used to it.
Yeah, so it's that layer of what people are already used to. And so, yeah, it's not just the heat, it will be the urban form, right? And what people are doing, how vulnerable they are statistically as a population. So there's so many different layers rather than just, oh, it's very hot here, so this is the riskiest area or whatever. Yeah, so interesting. So I guess happy to keep talking about that example or go to another example. I really want to dig in a little bit more around how you then consider your audience or the different people that are involved or that you need to report to or that you need to bring along the journey as well. So yeah, happy to stick with that example and we can talk there, or if you want to share another example and then some specific ones about audience.
We can start with this and go back in time and the kind of fantastic collaboration we had with when I was at the University of Wollongong before getting the job I have now as a researcher this time, and working with a urban design studio called Archilab, and based out of Copenhagen in Denmark, but also having an office in Sydney. So the story map for us again, yes, we've got a couple of our partners we want to engage with visually, but it's mainly about awareness. You're creating visual stories for three main objectives, and then the complementary objectives and excluding each other. It's pure awareness. You just put things there for people to understand better. Map of the months was a good example of that, but also the story maps when we don't know who's accessing it. Then you got engagement. So now you know better who are your targets and you need something out of the engagement. The story map for Other High, the product I just mentioned, probably we went a little bit towards that direction, but not that much. Map of the months, yes. Map of the months, we started the process with the communities and people from the administration who were really thinking about the issue or the topic, if it is not an issue. But then you've got decision. That's the next step. So awareness, engagement, decision. And decision is really back to the example I wanted to mention now. It is collaboration with Archilab. And they've been working, on all this new way of designing cities for people, by people. So the Ian Gale School of Thought. And the director and founder of Archilab was a student of Ian Gale. And they had started creating tools to engage with communities, to do urban design at precinct level or even street block level with the community and, of course, the urban planners. And we helped them to digitize 2 tools when they were in Australia on a couple of projects. The first one was a very simple one, which was based on a mobile phone, and it was a collage on a mobile phone. So there were communities being asked to come on a given day in a park or whatever needed to be refurbished, and they could take photos of the park. And then there was all these 2-dimensional, even at the end, there was 3-dimensional things you could plug on your little mobile phone in 5 minutes. And you could share your photos with all the others and you could like it. So there was this kind of not competition, but kind of, oh yeah, that's a really cool idea. And this was a fantastic engagement tool, but also going into the decision making, because then the councils Archilab was working with could collect all this digital information, because all these could be stored. And of course, we were asking people whether we would be authorized to do that. And all of a sudden, you knew how many people asked for more trees in that space or more benches, and so on and so forth. The second tool, which is more sophisticated, more demanding in terms of digitalization, is called Artinopoly. So it was like a monopoly, and for a long time it was a board game only, where people were coming together around a board game about precincts, and they were trying collectively to assess the issues and then to start thinking about the dream land, blue sky kind of new status, and how they could go from the current situation to the future. Very successful engagement. When COVID hit, they faced the issue that they could not engage physically with people. And so we developed a digital version of it, which worked very well during COVID. And so we had a project we were part of at the time with about Parramatta Road and the new Parramatta Road one day, the reward in Parramatta. And it was very successful in terms of engagement despite the distance. This said, I think that since COVID, and again, I've parted ways with this collaboration with my new job, but my understanding is that Archilab went back to the board game version because there is this in-person communication and body language that they felt was very important, even if preparation of the game is far more demanding than the digital version.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. And I like that, like, because we often talk about gamification, but in a digital sense, like, you know, we've got, I don't know, I was thinking about Duolingo for some reason, because that's how I started. I need to freshen up my Korean skills, so I started on that. But thinking about that gamification piece, but then it obviously started with a physical, you know, board game, which is so like, and I don't know whether I was, as you were talking, whether that, and even the photos taking, those are forms of data visualizations, because you're visualizing components that are real components that, you know, and you're sharing, I guess, your ideas as a data source for a decision maker, which is a really, interesting way to think about it.
And back to John's previous question you asked, the beauty of Archicity, and again, it was their concept, so I can't claim any input into the concept, is the fact that it can work with kids at school to adults and people in council. It's not very often that you've got a tool and using a bit of technology that's just parallel the whole gamut of the people you want to, the groups you want to engage with.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, thinking about the audience in that case, that in this case, the tool can actually be used by all of those different groups, whereas typically you're, you know, we'll use this version for the children, we'll use this version, and then, so interesting. I guess that's what, the power, the beauty of games and play and playfulness can have. Interesting. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and again, we can go back in time. You know, that's how old I am now. And when I was still working in the French public research system, but in Africa and in Indonesia later on. I was part of this group working on the COMMOD concept. So it was companion modeling, called it at the time, and trying to set up rules of engagement with communities, mainly at that time dealing with rural communities, so environmental and agricultural issues. And one of the key principles we defined for the COMMOD charter, we had a charter, we were very serious at the time, was the fact that using agent-based modeling, so we could represent anything, a farmer, a cow, a bird, just fun, but we didn't want this to be a video game. So we said, okay, if we do that, the first principle is to make sure that human is represented as a human being, not the birds and the cows. In the model, should be aware of the way they're represented. So this process, as a companion modeling process, hence the name, cannot happen in isolation of the context that you try to describe. And it's been a very successful 30 years journey for people who continue to work on these approaches. But again, very strict from a deontological and ethical perspective. And this is where visualization comes with engagement and decision. We shouldn't be using a model where people are represented without the people having their say about whether what's in there is realistic or not.
Yeah, I think that's that whole other, and I mean, very smart communities, smart cities kind of approach where we're not building cities, or we're not creating cities for people. It's with people and for people, as I guess we were talking about earlier. And bringing that into the digital realm as well is, I think a really important point to make there. And I think when we are creating these visualizations and stories, if we're going to use, somebody's story or their likeness, bringing them along the journey with us as well. And not even just bringing them, collaborating, designing together, co-designing that whole piece. Because
Absolutely.
And I think the process, and I've had a few of these conversations now with people, and what's come up time and time again is the process of creating a data visualization or story, or going through a project, is as important as the outcome. And you learn so much along the way. You get so much out of that process piece that it can't be. You can't just focus on the outcome of, say, this decision was made. It's actually what process, like the lens on the process has to be quite strong as well, because that really can be really impactful for people involved in that process.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to talk about challenges. But I know you've got a couple of other examples. So happy to talk about some more examples, and then leading on to challenges that we face when we're thinking about data visualizations and storytelling. So where should we go from here?
I think that the other examples that I was mentioning to you before we started the interview were more about this first part of my career, where it was really engaging with small community. And that's why it's flipping probably to the next stage of the interview about the challenges and limitations. And why I think I was good at it at the time, with a couple of very successful projects where we even not only went into decision mode with the communities, but also, and more importantly, stopping conflicts with communities in the Pacific between the authorities and the local communities or landowners, using this very visual and interactive process of gaming and computer models to put all this conflict into a safe box during 2 hours of a game for people to play with reality outside of reality, if it makes sense. So that was okay, but and that's why I was frustrated, and I wanted a bigger picture. It works very well at small scale, a couple of tens people, a couple of hundreds maximum, maybe, and then you're losing a lot of traction because you're not sure whether you're presenting everybody. So think about a small town, a big city. How do I make sure that I can still represent everybody there. So that has always been the frustration of this first principle. Let's make sure that what's in the model reflect the people in the model. There comes the scale where you're not sure what you're doing anymore, and you fall back into more traditional approaches to modeling and visualization. So that and I don't think we made a lot of progress, except trying to have crowdsourcing. So I've probably a project that I forgot to mention before, which, if I think about it, is also about narrative and data visualization. When I was in Wollongong, again at University of Wollongong, we had this fantastic project that was sponsored by DSHAT, but also by Twitter. And I insist it was Twitter, not X. It was the good Twitter. It was a good little bluebird. And they had just set up at the time this data grant competition. They did it once only during the whole existence of Twitter. And they asked for projects they wanted to understand the value of the data they were storing, because at the time they were storing all the tweets from around the world. And we came up with this idea of using tweets from Twitter in Jakarta to do crowdsourcing and real-time mapping of flooding during the flooding season in Jakarta, knowing that most of the automated system or even the administrative monitoring was pretty lame. And I've been living and working in Jakarta for 5 years before that. And so we say, okay, if we can reach out to these people and asking them where they are and whether they kind of experience flooding and how and where, and send us a photo, that's going to be fantastic information for the disaster authority, the disaster management authority. Sorry. And so we did it, and we trialed the whole approach in February 2013 at the peak of the flooding season, without telling anyone. It was before the data grant competition. And for an hour, I think what we were doing, we were reading all the tweets coming from Jakarta in real time. And as soon as there was something about rain or water in English and in Indonesian, we were sending back a message to the individual, say, well, if you're in Jakarta now talking about flooding, please send us back a photo and more precision about this. Yeah, that's an hour. That's how long Twitter gave us before unplugging us from the system and sending us a very charming email saying, who the hell are you? Because you're spending all Jakarta. And so we explained who we were, the researchers in charge, the young researchers in charge of the project said, well, this is who we are, this is what we do. And Twitter at the time, they were very cool, said, wow, that's a cool project. We've got a brand competition, please use it. What happened 2 years later is that, and still in operation, as I understand, is that every year during the flooding season, the control room of the disaster management authority in Jakarta, they've got this map of Jakarta with all the tweets coming in. And they can aggregate all that and know where the more sensitive part of Jakarta are and where they have to send operational teams to solve any given problem. So this is where community engagement, because people had to understand why they would have to respond to this tweet coming from nowhere. And there was a lot of communication about the program every year. And we launched with the Governor General of Jakarta at the time. And now the project is handled literally by a local team of young Indonesian people. For me, that's probably the quintessential kind of success story in terms of data-based, engaging with community, having a mapping system, a visualization that's exactly what people who want to take decision need to have now.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I guess really like that crowdsourcing element, taking a new data source, a new lens on the data source, then being able to make, because I guess that data on its own, well, people are tweeting and okay, maybe there's something happening here, but without the visualization at the end, it's not super useful. Yeah. Like you can't put tweets in a spreadsheet and expect people to know where it's going. So adding, location based obviously as well in that case is imperative, because it doesn't matter doesn't matter if you know where the flooding is, if you know that there's flooding, if you don't know where it is. Yeah, so interesting. So I'm just looking at the time. We've got a little bit left. I want to talk about, I mean, you've given us a lot of examples already, but is there any other examples of data visualizations or stories that have left an impression on you, or like if it's one that you weren't necessarily working on but have left an impression on you, or if there's another one that you're working on that influenced an outcome for yourself or others?
I'll be a bit controversial here, probably. So, no, I don't think I've got anything in my bag of goodies for you, Zoe, unfortunately. This was the best one I could give you. And I'll send you a link about the project in Jakarta. I still think I'm old enough I still like graph. So I'm still a geek somewhere. And I still like when you've got a beautiful graph that's so intuitive, saying, oh gosh, that's cool. It works for me. I'm not saying it would work for everyone, but there's something fundamental into the data itself, without gimmick, without much or anything, talking to the audience. And that's an art. I remember one of the very, very first bubble charts, the animated bubble charts that was created probably more than 10 years ago now. It was about demographics. I don't know. Now you can find this on LinkedIn all the time. I don't know, it was bar chart, but I think there's something fascinating when you take it to this level of simplicity, where you go data visualization and it moves to a point which is becoming more interesting, and you capture immediately the interest of the audience. So for me, that's still some kind of black magic. Something where I'm not that impressed so far is all the 3D visualization of cities, digital twins. I don't think we're getting it, honestly. We just wrap nice colors in 3 dimensions on an urban form. Most of the time, it's more confusing than anything else. And there's absolutely no dynamics in it. So that's why I've always been a bit frustrated and critical, to be fair, of, especially in Australia, all these digital twins are just popping up around the country, which are nothing more, nothing less than the shopping cart behind a 3-dimensional map. And I say, call it a digital twin if you start putting dynamics into it. I know what an industrial digital twin is. A Rolls-Royce engine, everything in there, and there's even a virtual button you push, and the turbine, just kick in, and you've got visual fuel coming in and visual power and everything. A digital twin of cities, color flashing here and there, and new building here and there. Where are the people? Where are the dynamics? Where's the energy? Simple graph, I'm buying every day a simple bubble graph rather than a fancy 3-dimensional visualization so far.
Interesting. When you were talking about the simplicity and I guess the maybe even minimalist nature of, say, a graph or something like that, you were also talking about potentially animation or making it dynamic. Do you think that animation piece is really important, or does it depend on the context, whether it's static or dynamic, or like I'm thinking about interactivity as well, like those kind of some of those key components?
Are we going to fall into philosophy now? I think as cognitive human beings, we're quite good at comprehending 3-dimensional space. And now with all these tools, zooming in and zooming out, which was quite, 40 years ago, just something that all magic. Now everybody, all the kids understand that. Time, we're still struggling with time. I think that our brain has not evolved that fast to bring time and space and zoom in, zoom out, and zoom in, zoom out time as well. And this is where, when you've got a graph like that brings your time dependency into it, there's something special happening.
Yeah. Time has come up a little bit as well, as a key, and the time as in a few different dimensions of time as well. Like obviously length of time, years, like being able to see trends and things like that. But then how, for example, if you're watching, say, a documentary, which is a medium for data visualization, how long something is on the screen for, and then as a human, how long it takes us to bring it in, and then how long we engage with a certain graphic or something like that as well. But then so there's like dimensions of time that need to be, should be considered, which is an interesting thing to think about. Time as multi-dimensional and layered too. Lots of things to think about. Lucky I've got 3 years or so to finish this PhD. We are nearly at the end. So we've talked about some different examples, heaps of examples. I love all of those. We'll put the links in the show notes. Well, let's finish on any suggestions for listeners to use data storytelling in their own work or life.
Make sure that you visualize, you know why you're visualizing. So as I mentioned before, awareness, engagement, and decision. That's roughly, you can be more precise than that, but be honest with yourself and with the people who engage with what's the objective of the realization. Then know your audience when you decide what's going to be the objective, and try to get some feedback about what will be the best visualization. And I can give you a lot of examples for fun. When I started at University of Wollongong in 2011, we were engaged in a project with Transport New South Wales about an agent-based modeling of transport and residential mobility for 20 years. It was a very, very complicated project. And at one stage, save time, said, we could start doing three-dimensional representation of part of Sydney with the cars and even the future tram at the time, or that way. And we brought this to the secretary of the department at the time. He looked at it for 5 minutes and he said, no, sorry, this project and the delivery is for my planners, transport planners, and the urban planners to work together. This is for the public, general public. This is for the media. It's a PR exercise. What I want is the graphs and things that they can work on. And it always, because it didn't take him 5 minutes. He said, no, not that. So that's interesting when you've got these kind of people who work actually the kind of variation they need for the people who have to work on the solution.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And sometimes it takes them to see what they don't want to then be able to say what they do want. Because potentially beforehand, if you said, what exactly do you want? But, well, maybe something like this, or you show me something. But when they see the thing that, no, that's not my audience, then they can say no. And then, the ideas of, well, if it's not that, then it has to be something else. So, the audience piece is so important to understand.
I think there's still a lot to learn from marketing on that side.
Yeah, you are so right. And yes. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this because I am particularly interested in persuasive data storytelling for public good. So how can we make better decisions? How can we use what we know about how people think and how they make decisions and behavioral economics and nudge people in the right direction, or the way that we want people to, or what information we want them to absorb. But similarly to what you were talking about, is it just to inform, is it to engage, or is it for them to take an action or make a decision from, is really key as well.
Yeah, and the last point you're making is crucial actually, because this is great, but at the same time it's a very dangerous position to put yourselves, myself, whoever's doing this, because you have to make a choice whether you want to be an external observer, which is nearly impossible in this case, or you're an engaged observer. And in this case, you're coming with your own bias. So what you think is working for good and nudging for good and that's something I've been struggling myself for a long time and not being able, obviously, to give you an answer. So
yes, I know it's a struggle, and I guess, but I also the way that is it cognitive dissonance try and manage that is there has to be a decision made. There has to be a story there has to be a message. Numbers are not neutral as much as we want them to be. So bringing in something, and I guess from your, what you were saying earlier, that engagement piece with the people that it will affect, or, that you're bringing along the journey, that can then dilute my bias by bringing in, everyone's got their own bias. So bringing that in.
You make me think about something else. When I was teaching, I taught my students all the time is that make a difference between data, information, and knowledge. Data has to be as objective as possible. By definition, you're measuring something. So there might be a bias in the sensor, for example, you're using, but data is data, it's dry. Smart data always make me laugh because I've never met a smart data ever. Data is as dumb as information. So you try to gather your data, you put in the shapes of the graph and all the things you mentioned, you visualize it, but you already there at this stage, information only, you're taking decisions. You're making decisions about who's the audience, what do we want to show, what kind of data do I want, how do I aggregate it? So there's already a bias there and you have to recognize that. And most of the time is a bias for good because you try to simplify the story from the data. But it means that from the same data, 2, 3, 4, 10 people might have a different information out of exactly the same data. And this is okay. It's not that one person will be right and the 9 others will be wrong. It's that, yes, there's different ways of having the same data, talking to you and to others. And then how this information translates into knowledge, it's not, and I think that's where we're falling apart most of the time. We think that we want to provide that information, job is done. Absolutely not. I think that the hard yards is really information and knowledge. What kind of knowledge do the audience, as the audience, need to make a decision?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a perfect way to finish this podcast, finish this interview. Thank you so much, Pascal, for coming on and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Thank you for the invitation, Zoe, and good luck with the PhD.
Thank you. I look forward to our next conversation. We'll talk soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes at zoeether.com/podcast. That's zoeeather.com/podcast. Have you got a question for me or one of our guests? We'd love to hear from you. Just shoot us an email at hello@mysmart.community. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you follow the podcast wherever you listen and connect with us on LinkedIn too. And hey, ratings and reviews are always welcome. They help more smart humans just like you find the show. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.